Okay, so we're gonna start off looking at some of the homework that got turned in for assignment number 2. And then we're actually going to do some of that work again in this class. So this happens every single week, and if I all of a sudden pull one of your files up, don't get all flipped out that I'm trying to make an example out of you, whatever. Typically when I show a file, it's because there's a lot of people who've had the same issue in this class. So to be perfectly honest with you, most of the time it simply has to do with whoever's comes first in alphabetical order, because that's how I grade stuff. So if all of a sudden I hit a problem and it's you and you're the first one, whatever, then usually that's an example that I make out of this. So, but at any rate, the point that I'm trying to make in all of this is that do not feel like I'm singling you out or pointing the finger at you or doing anything like this sort, whatever. These are problems that are common to everyone, and that everyone's sort of like trying to deal with in here. So don't be sensitive about this, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So with that all said, we're going to take, I'm not going to look at a lot of the profile stuff that was actually turned in. Well, I take that back. I am. So I made a big deal about naming your files a very specific way at the first class that we were in, and that's actually true with the exception of this first assignment, where in the assignment it says specifically to name these things after the shooting that you're doing. And the reason that is that once you get inside of Photoshop and you go to apply a custom sensor profile, if you don't have any idea what that sensor profile is or what it's for, then you're just at a loss. And that's the problem with the sort of standard naming convention that the color checker software offers up, is that it offers you the name of your camera brand. It'll say, yeah, Canon 5D Mark II. But it doesn't say that it's your 5D Mark II or someone else's 5D Mark II. And to take it a step further, it doesn't have anything to do with the lighting situation or the particular setup that you've actually got going where you captured all that stuff. And all of those elements make for a better profile. So in the 4 different situations that you guys generated those custom profiles for, even though they were mostly shot outside, there was mostly the same kind of light, it was the same camera for all of that, there are different lighting situations that can have enough spin and enough effect on this that you should be doing a single profile for those lighting situations. So with that being said, this was the naming convention around here was correct. What I would say about this is that this is actually including frame numbers in here, and those are really pretty unnecessary, but nonetheless, that's what was going on here. An example where it didn't work out so well, and again, I'm not really sure whose I'm going to run into here first. Yeah, Jax was, so here in the case of Jax, he actually named this the way I'd ask you to name your all the assignment files that you turned in, which is great for all the stuff that you turn in from this point going forward. But this becomes really difficult for him once he gets into, so the profiles will still work fine, but when he gets in there, it's like, how does he know which one of these profiles is actually targeted at which one of those images that he built the profile from? There's just no real way to know. Now, if he's doing it all at the same time, like he makes his profiles and he's going to use them that day, then yeah, he probably can remember that stuff. But if he comes back and revisits this 6 months later, there's just simply no way. And then there were other people who got even worse in here. There's people who started making up names for their profiles, which again might work if you're only going to use it for that one very specific moment, but otherwise not such a good thing. However, I do want to talk more about, and I think, yeah, I'm going to take a look at this guy right here. I'm going to open up this. This is one of the ones that was actually, it was an assignment, but also one that was going to be actually was part of the go in, add the custom profile, and do your custom color balance. And if you take a look at this, I'm just going to open this up in Camera Raw. You can see there's this little triangle right here, and what that's saying is that even though this profile is the correct one, The profile itself exists in the system. It's where you went to go get those profiles in order to turn them in. And as long as you're working on that system, Photoshop can actually find the profile and you're good to go. But if you take your file and you go to a different system that this profile is not on, then it gets orphaned. And that's what this little triangle right here is about. And it says that the profile is not installed, the rendering is incorrect. That is not what you want to see on your files when you're actually working on them. So that's the first mistake. Again, we're going to take care of all of this stuff. The second mistake is this thing right down here, and it says the white balance is as shot. What that means is that there has been no deliberate white balance based on user part. Nobody has gone in using this little eyedropper and picked a spot on here to do white balance, or gone in and actually played with the temperature sliders or the color sliders. But watch what happens when I do this. I'm going to actually grab the white balance tool and we'll just white balance on the background, and you can see this changes from as shot to custom, and that's what I'm actually looking for in these. So this is the easiest way for me to spot what was going right and what was going wrong. Cancel out of that. And show you Xavier's. So in this case, this was the best of all worlds. So we've actually got a scene that's got the color card in it, and if you double click and open it up, it'll come into Camera Raw. You'll see that there is a custom profile in here. Again, the problem that I've got with this is that it's named after the camera model that shot it. It's not after the camera model that shot it in this particular lighting setup, in this particular lighting scene. But nonetheless, it's there, and there's also a custom profile, a custom white balance that's actually added to it. If I go and actually take a look at the file without the card, this one, you'll see that the same thing exists in here. So he was actually opening these up using the card to establish the profile and the white balance, but then applying that to the image that does not have the card or the white balance in it. And so he gets the best of both. He gets all the advantages of having the card, but he doesn't have to actually have a card in every scene that he shoots that he's ultimately then got to retouch out. Excuse me. And one last one to look at, and then like I say, we're going to do this from beginning to end, the entire thing. We're also going to talk about how to actually process your files, because we had some pretty wildly divergent moves on this. People processing in very, very, very different ways. So I'm going to take a look at Anthony's here really quick. And in this one, the issue that I've got with this, or the problem with this one, and I don't know whether it was a flip of layers, because typically background layer would be the underneath part and the talent layer would be on the top part. But this layer mask, the layer mask is actually functioning. If I turn off the top layer, you can see that it's functioning. It's actually hiding this. But then if you put a solid layer up on top of it, it doesn't make any difference at all. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag the layer mask up on top of the other one and let go there. And that to me was actually a more interesting way to process this file than I think maybe you wanted to do. But because this was a way to actually make the background darker, and then the model exists here. The issue that I have with this, though, is that, and this is something that happens when you first start doing all of this multiple processing like we're doing in here, is that everybody's goal seems to be to get everything to the middle. So people go in and they select the highlights and they bring them down. And they go in and they select the shadows and they open them up. And the whole thing is that what you're doing is you're taking your tonal range and you're compressing it from both ends, from the highlight end and the shadow end, and you're pushing it all towards the middle, which makes for a very flat file. So that's not always the right answer to this. What I would say in looking at this file, or thinking about looking at this file, is that in darkening the background and making that window darker, the girl does not separate from this at all. It's just the opposite. It actually makes it worse, because she is now a dark figure on a dark background, so she doesn't pop off this background. So instead, if I was going to consider doing this as quickly as I possibly could do this, I'm actually going to add a curve on top of all of this. One of the things that we're going to talk about today is blending modes. In using blending modes, you don't necessarily have to make a copy of your image. So a lot of people are used to doing this. If they wanted to use a blending mode to make this lighter or darker, they would select the bottom layer, the top layer's eyeball is turned off. Command J to actually copy it and then set the blending mode to multiply or something like that to make it darker. The problem with this is that when we actually did that copy, we made a copy of that of the data, of the entire data set. And look what's happening. I've got my drop-down menu over here on this side. There's a little drop-down menu on the underside of your image. And you can pick it to show different things. You can do document sizes. A lot of times I'll keep this on profile because then I can see at the bottom it says Adobe RGB. It's a good check for me to know that something didn't go wrong and that I'm staying in Adobe RGB. But you can also change this to actually show the size. And in the size here, you'll see there's two different numbers. There's a 60.2 megabytes followed by a / and then 196. That 196, well, the 62 represents how big this file would be if I were to flatten it into a single layer. The 196 shows you how big this image is ultimately getting because I keep duplicating that raw data information. So instead of the 60, I've now got 3 of those, and those 3 of them hit 180, and then there's some overhead that gets me up to 196. I'm going to throw this away, the second one, and you can see if I were to save this, close it, and reopen it again, whatever, it would drop down. But nonetheless, I'm going to simply add a curve. I can do the same thing with a curve. Oh, sorry. And on this curve, I'm actually going to set it to multiply, and you'll see we get the very same thing. So multiply will actually make this whole thing darker. However, I want to do the opposite part of that. I'm actually going to hit screen to make it considerably lighter. And then I'm going to get rid of the mask that's on there and simply delete it and then drag this down on top of it. So now what I've got is the girl at a normal exposure but a considerably lighter background, and she explodes off of this thing. So some of this stuff is, do not go into this and say, okay, my goal is to bring the highlights down and open the shadows up. Your goal in here is pictorial. Your goal in here is that what do I really want to do with this? Do I really want to bury the girl in a background that's the same tone and color as she is? Or do I want to really leap up off the page? I mean, what is the goal? And depending on your artistic intent, you could have a situation where you really want to bury them in there, where you really want them to be the same. So, but in this case, this is how I would actually treat this. Are there any questions about this part? All right, so I want to do this whole process with you guys from beginning to end. And then we're going to actually develop this file the way that I think you probably should develop it, or at least the way that we'll begin to see it. We're going to look at some numbers, talk about some things. I really need you guys to work on this file. You might want to have a piece of paper or notebook next to you. There's a couple of numbers that I'm going to throw out for you that you might want to remember. But there's very similar things like when we talk about perfect exposure being 245 to 250. There's a couple of other things that we're going to get into today that are aids to help you figure out the best way to process your files. So to start with, we need to go to your application folder, and we need to go ahead and launch the color checker profile software. So again, it's the color camera calibration software. It's named the same on both Windows as it is on Mac. Go ahead and launch that so that we can start this process. And then I'm going to go find the file that I want to actually make this with. So it's going to be in retouching. It will be in our class number 2. It will be in your assignment folder. And the one that I'm looking for is so everybody's gotten to the assignment folder for session number 2, correct? Okay, I'll wait. Good? All right. So inside the assignment folder, it's the bottom folder. It's the one. It's the 03 version at the very end. So if you just, it's a very long number, 201000702_CAR_fashion_03. It's inside of 03. Inside that capture folder, the one that we're looking for is, there's going to be 2 of them. But the first one is that we're going to actually deal with is the frame number 1 in here. So it's the picture of the couple standing on the sidewalk with somebody holding a color card in front of them. Everybody got this guy? Double click on it to open up just that part. Now, we don't need to set anything in here right now. We'll get to that part later. What I'm trying to do right now is simply build the sensor profile for this situation that I've got right here. So to do that, come up, you'll see that I'm missing a profile right here. So this is, again, this profile is not on my, my computer right now, but it's going to be in just a second. If you take a look at the top of your screen, there's a box on the top right-hand side with a little arrow pointing in it. If you click on that box, this is how you build a DNG of this raw data. In the very top destination, click on the drop-down menu, make sure that it's set to save in same location, and pretty much the rest of it you can leave just as its default and simply hit save. You'll see a little line on the lower left-hand side. It's a tracking line about how long it takes to do that, because you can do 1,000 of these at one time. You can do 100,000 of these at one time, and you'll get a progress bar that goes down along the bottom so you can watch how long it's going to ultimately take. In our case, we've done everything we needed to do right now, so I'm going to simply click Done to get rid of that. And then I'm going to go into my Finder or back to your desktop and look, and you will see that there is a DNG copy. It's the name is exactly the same, except instead of a .cr2, it's got a .dng. I'm going to hit the return. I've just selected this once. I don't want to double select it because I don't want to open the DNG right now. I'm just going to hit the return key, which actually gives me a selection of just the name. I want to just copy the name. I'm dyslexic. The idea of me trying to copy that into a dialog box to put in the name of what this profile is going to be is, you might as well like pull my fingernails out with a pair of pliers. I hate that stuff. I don't ever do this. I'm a huge copy and paste fan. So anyway, Command C will copy it. If you can't remember that, come up to the file, the edit menu and come down and just do copy. It'll copy that name. And then I'm going to drag this file on top of the dialog box in the application, the color checker camera calibration part. So I've got to have it visible, so the color calibration is visible right here. I'm going to grab the DNG and I'm going to drag it and drop it onto this guy right here. And it finds the image. Now, some of you guys did for the ones that you're doing, there was one of these that had a girl standing in front of a white car. And if you tried to do this on that, sometimes you get a warning saying that the card is overexposed. You can't use it. We can't find a white point to make this work. Sometimes, in the last time when I did it last night, what ended up happening was that this grid that's on here was misplaced. This is what the grid looked like when I first opened it. It was more like this. If this happens to you, you can simply use those little green points that are at the corners to relocate this so that it's in the correct spot. But the real trick to the solution of that was that there was a second card in there that was properly exposed. So, yeah. Anyway, this is now ready to go. So I'm going to click on Create Profile. A dialog box will come up and say, what do you want to call this thing? And this again is the problem. Every Canon EOS 5D Mark II in the world is not going to be able to use this profile. This is just for the one model of this camera that I have. I don't really care what the camera model is. I care about the shooting that it came from, because it is a combination of the camera, the lens, the lighting situation. All of those things are built into this profile. And so the profile is designed specifically for this shoot. So I'm going to name it that way. To do that, I'm going to click on where it says the 5D Mark II. I'm going to leave that .dcp because that's the extension saying it's a digital calibration profile or a DNG calibration profile. So I'm going to get rid of that whole Canon name just using the backspace key. And then I'm going to hit Command V, and Command V does not work. It doesn't put in, it doesn't paste this in. The UI of the design of this program excludes that. You'll see that there also isn't an edit menu here either. So to get around that, you do what would be considered a right click. If you have a 2-button mouse, you would click on the right button and you'll get a drop-down menu. If you're on just a regular keyboard for a Macintosh, you hold down the Control key and click and you will get a drop-down menu, I hope. Sorry. It's not going to let me keep that .dcp anyway. And in the Control drop-down, I get this paste. On some Macintosh laptops, a 2-finger swipe will also give you a right-click drop-down. So I'm going to do paste. It's going to put in the name of the shooting that I've used here. I'm going to get rid of the frame. That was frame number 001. I don't need the frame 001. I just need this shooting in there. However, I do want that .dcp. So .dcp. And then where's it going to be put? It goes into your camera profiles. If you want to know where those things are, click on this drop-down menu and you'll get the tree. It goes, so it's on my MacBook Pro, my Macintosh hard drive, and users, me, the user, in the personal library, application support, Adobe Camera Raw, camera profiles. That's where these things are actually located, and so that's where I'm going to leave it. And then I'm simply going to hit save. And I like to think this program is doing something, making it better profiles all the time. This used to happen really fast. I mean, literally that little thing would slide across once or twice and it would be done. So I'm hoping this is a quality issue that they're causing it to take more time. But it says, okay, the profile has been created successfully. You may need to restart your applications to use that. We're going to find out right now. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. I'm going to quit this color calibration software. I don't need to do that guy anymore. However, this DNG that we've made, so I'm back to the DNG that I made that I used just then to bring into that program to make this. If you double click on the DNG right now, it's going to open up and you will notice that there's still a mismatch going on here in this profile. Because when the DNG was initially made, that's when it gets tagged with the profile. And that's sticky, so even though I've got the correct one right now, it's never going to find it here, so I'm going to hit cancel out of this. You want to throw that DNG away. We've got to make another one that actually has the profile, the correct one embedded in it. So I'm going to click on this guy. I'm simply going to throw that DNG away. I am going to, though, start not only my frame number 1, but I'm also going to go after, I think it's frame number 2. Let me just check really quick. It is frame number 2. I want to open both of those at the same time. Now, you may have an XMP file in between the two. That part doesn't matter. So I'm going to just select all 3 of those and hit open. It will bring both of these into Camera Raw. So the top one is the one that's got the little color card in it, and the bottom one is actually the one that we need to do this processing on. I need to find the correct profile, the custom one that I just built. So in the basic panel on the right-hand side, I'm going to look where it says profile, where I've got the mismatch. Right to the right of profile, there's 3 little squares and a magnifying glass. If you click on it, this allows you to browse for your profiles. You'll see it opens up a panel here. As you scroll down to the bottom of the panel, you will see at the very bottom there's a drop-down flyout menu for Adobe RAW, for color matching, and then for just profiles. All of your custom ones end up in just profiles. So if we click on that just profiles, you will see that there's only one of them in here. I'm going to click on that, and you will now notice that that morning triangle has gone away. I'm going to click at the very top underneath the histogram, the back button. That gets me back to my normal, everything else in here. I am going to zoom into the color card, and to do the color correction, the white balance color correction, you go to the next thing down where it says white balance, and you click on the little eyedropper. You come over on top of your image, and I typically use the gray patch that's right next to the red patch. You don't want to use darker colors, darker tones of gray in here, because color casting happens up in the highlights. But you also don't want to use the lightest or the lighter of the two patches, because you are putting your color correction curve so close up to the very top corner that it doesn't really have a chance to move. It does very radical, weird, bizarre movements to try to color correct if you are that close to white, or basically your high end. So this is sort of the lesser of all evils. So I'm going to click on that. So this thing now has a custom profile. It's got a custom white balance. But I need to apply that to the image that has got the girl with the shopping bag in it. So to do that, hover over the thumbnail. And sometimes I have my thumbnails always on the left-hand side. Your thumbnails may be on the right-hand side, on the bottom. It's just a matter of preferences. I'm going to come up to the top thumbnail, the one that's actually got all of this on it. And I'm going to, if you hover over it, you'll get 3 little lines. I'm going to click on those 3 little lines. And I'm going to do a select all, and that selects the other frame underneath it as well. If I had 100 frames, it would select all 100. Then I'm going to go back up to that very same place, this 3 little dots again on the one that's got the color card on it that I'm working on, the one that's visible. Click on those 3 little dots and come down to Sync Settings. And when I do that, it'll open up a dialog box here. You can leave it, and there's a subset here. It dropped down for its defaults. All we've done is added a profile and done white balance. That's all we've done in here. However, if you're not sure, you may have done other stuff, whatever, you can come up and just click all, and everything will be selected in this. You can actually open these things up and turn things off. So let's say, okay, I want to sync the white balance and the exposure, but I don't want to sync the dehazing or the clarity or whatever. I mean, you can pick and choose all of this, but all we've done are those 2 things. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. And now if you click on the image that does not have the color card in it, you will see that it's got a custom profile that's inside of it, and you will also see that it's actually got a custom white balance. These things are now embedded in this image. Now at this stage of the game, we could open this as an object, but the problem that I've gotten doing that is that this profile has not been embedded into the raw data DNG yet. I've got to make that DNG by clicking on the little arrow that points down. So I'm going to click on the little arrow that points down and simply hit Save. Then I'm going to hit Done. And then I'm going to go back and look at my image, and you will see that down here I now have a DNG that has got the raw data in it, but it's also got the profile embedded in it, and it's also got the custom color correction embedded in it. And if I launch this now, these things are all embedded, and this is the beginning of how I start to build my raw data file. Are there questions about this part? Yes?
I don't know if this matters, but like when you had both of the files, the one with the color card and the one without, my color profile it didn't have the bar, it just said like the normal camera setting.
So you didn't sync the 2?
I just did, but when we first got into camera raw, it wasn't.
Oh yeah, but when you first got in it, it shouldn't have anything in it. It'll just have Adobe Standard or Camera Standard or something like that. It picks what Adobe thinks you should have.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so here we are in the beginning of this. So then we need to get into the processing of this file, and this is where a lot of people screwed things up. And so I want to talk about that. You guys all remember when we were here last week looking at this. I'm showing the grayscale ramp. You remember this thing that we had right here? And you remember everybody said, oh yeah, looking at this, I see the V in the highlight right around that 245 to 250. Well, that was the proper exposure for this. So if we were to, I'm going to cancel out of this really quick. I just want to open up well, let's open up both of them now. So go ahead and make sure that it's the DNG, not the CR2 file of that, but we will do the CR2 file. Hopefully both of these can open at the same time. We'll see. So if I zoom in to the color card right here and I hover over it, you can actually see up at the very top under my histogram that I've got a 235, 235, 234. It's a neutral color, whatever, but it's a little bit underexposed. Now, when I open this in Capture One, which is what I shoot with Tutor, when I'm actually shooting, that will read 245, 245, 245. Different engines process a little bit differently, just so that you know. So this would indicate that I'm slightly underexposed, and if I want to see how much, I can come over to the toolbar on the far right side. Almost at the bottom, there is a little eyedropper with a little pointer on it. You can click on that. It's just, again, it's a color sampler point, and I can drop it right onto the white point right here. And then I get a readout up at the very top, giving me those same exact readouts, and I can push my exposure up. I'm going to bring it up to roughly plus 2/3 of a stop. A 0.6 is what will actually give me the proper exposure on this. However, I already know that these are correct based on the information that I was getting when I shot this tethered in Capture One. So I know that my highlight part in here is actually okay. I'm going to cancel out of this thing again one more time because I want to just open the card, but I was going to check on that because the other thing we did with this set of point patches is we figured out where the shadow detail should actually be, right? And we said somewhere around the 25s, right? 25, 25, 25 was a good target for this. So I'm going to open again the DNG of that frame number 2. And I'm going to accept the fact that my exposure has set my highlight point detail exactly where I need it to be. However, there are checks that we can do on this. The first thing, though, I'm going to do is zoom in to basically her torso. And I'm trying to find in here, what do I want to have true shadow detail in it? Now, if you look at this area that's right underneath her arm, there's a little sort of triangle in here. That is a shadow buried inside of a shadow. And if we take a look at the readout in my histogram, you can see it's giving me a 5, 3, and a 6. You don't want shadow detail in there. That should be black. That is not shadow. If you take a look on the outer sleeve out here, this is a much better indication of where I should have shadow detail. And you can see here, I'm already 25, 26, 27. So that part's actually working really well for me. If I look at down here, right next to her waist, in that same sort of area. Down in here, I'm like a 20, a 19, 20, something like that. So I'm down here a little bit, but I'm actually extremely close to where I want to be on this guy. So one of the things that I do all the time, and you guys should get in the habit of doing this as well, is I want to see what Photoshop thinks that I should be doing. So I'm going to zip back out, and I'm simply going to hit the auto button at the very top of the edit menu. And when I hit the auto button, you can see it darkens everything up. It pumps in a bunch of saturation that's actually happening in here. It does all those sorts of things. Now, the thing that I care about the most in this is that it's actually separating my midtones as much as it can to give me detail. So the things like contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, I would avoid whites and blacks because those are just the top ends. But the shadow, highlights, contrast part in here, those are values that I could actually keep because, again, it's giving me more detail in the midtones. But I can zero everything else out. So I'm going to double-click on my exposure to zero it out. I'm going to double-click on vibrance to zero it out. I'm going to double-click on saturation to zero it out. I'm going to double-click on the blacks to zero them out and the whites to zero them out. And then I'm going to look at this image and say, did this part work for me? And I'm going to go in and check this area again. And I'm reading now in that same area in here, I'm reading, it's actually this part that I want to sort of be shadow detail. It's pushed this up into like the 30s. So none of this part is actually working for me. So I'm going to cancel out of all of it by clicking on the auto button again. But sometimes auto gives you parts that you want to actually keep. It's not an all or nothing investment. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, so I feel like I've got this part somewhat correct, but I need to check on true exposure. So this is the thing I need you to write down. Another trick, one of the hard parts in using a color card to determine exposure is that it doesn't always give you what you would expect a reading to actually be, because it's a flat card, it's not dimensional, it's not round. So for instance, if I'm holding a flat card up like this, I'm not really if I'm outside shooting and there's a lot of sky overhead and clouds and sun and all that kind of stuff overhead, this card is not actually getting a lot of that information. It's being reflected. What's mostly reflecting off of it is what is directly in front of it. So what's coming off of buildings and maybe a little bit off the ground, that's what's really lighting up this card. However, if you take a look at her face is three-dimensional, so her face is actually getting some of that light from the clouds in the sky and above and all that kind of stuff, whatever. So what I use is a second judge on exposure. And this is very specific. This is not discriminatory. This is just how this works. It has to be Caucasian skin. And what you are looking for is a real strong highlight reflection off of Caucasian skin, the brightest that you'll find in the scene. So it's going to be on her face. It's not going to be on her hands. And what you're looking for is, in that brightest of highlight, you are looking for an R value reading, so red channel only, between 225 and 245. That's what we're looking for here. So for me, if I zoom in on this girl's face, and let me go to 200 in here really quick. If I take a look at this girl's face, I can see the major highlights. There's one that's like right above her eyebrow on one side. Her face is relatively flatly lit. There's one sort of right at the bridge of her nose. And those are really the highest spots the most lightest spots that I've actually got going on in here. So I'm hovering over the highlight part that's right on her nose, and I can see the readout that I'm getting in my R value is reading as a 221. That is below my threshold. That is an indication that this is an underexposed file. To fix that, I'm going to again go over to the far side, the right side. I'm going to click on the Add Color Sampler tool, and I'm going to come over and drop that pretty much right there. Again, the hottest spot of that highlight on the bridge of her nose. I'm going to drop it right there. And you can see I'm getting a 220 in the R channel. That's all I'm looking for here. I don't care about the other channel readings here. I'm going to bump this exposure up. And again, I'm already gone back to auto again. So somehow I hit on auto. So now when I take that off, I'm getting up to a 224 in my R channel. Typically for me and the beauty work that I do, I like to blow skin tones out a little bit more. So I said that range was 225 to 245. I'm only going to go halfway there. A 235 is a really good solid place for me to be. So I'm going to grab the exposure slider and I'm going to crank this up, looking that readout the whole time until I get up to like a 234, 235, whatever. So I'm plus a 0.4 in my exposure. That's roughly what I've actually gotten up to in here. So that sort of gives me my white point where I'm sort of like going in exposure here. I'm going to then zoom back out and I'm going to zoom into that area that I think should have solid shadow detail in it. And I'm looking now, not at her sleeve here, but I'm actually looking at the folds that are underneath, right by her arm. Not the one that's in that deepest blackish shadow in there, but the one that's a little bit out, sort of in, you can see the folding area that I'm sort of in this area right in here. And I'm getting a reading in here of a 22, 21, 23 that needs to be lifted just a little bit. So I'm going to put a color sampler point there as well. if it'll let me select one. And apparently it does not want me to select one.
Did you click on new sample?
Did I click on what?
New sample in the top left for other color samples like
Oh, you are kidding me. Thank you for that, but why would be my only question. All right, well, at any rate, yeah, so anyway, I'm going to put another color sampler pointer right here, and you can see it's reading in the 21s. So I'm just going to lift my shadow. So I'm going to come over to my shadow highlight slider, and I'm going to start to push it towards the right until I get that up to like 24, somewhere in there. That part actually seems close enough to me, and I'm going to zip back out. So a lot of people would look at this and say, well, that just looks it's opened up, it's too flat, I don't really have any decent contrast in there, that kind of stuff as well, whatever. For me, I'm looking for mid-tone contrast. I don't want to blow her hair out anymore, and I really don't want to get this shadow any deeper, so mid-tone contrast. And mid-tone contrast, by definition, is not this contrast slider right here, it's clarity. So I'm going to grab clarity, and I'm actually going to drag that up. And you can see it starts to put more sort of a gutsier feeling that's going on back into the outfit that she's actually wearing. It also did drop my shadow point down here, so maybe looking at this, I say to myself, that's not a shadow point that I really care about. And so then I'm going to look at the sleeve over here to see where that's at. And I'm getting all the detail that I want over here in the sleeve, so I'm feeling pretty good about this part right here. So this would be roughly the base where I would actually start with this. And I would say, okay, open this as an object. So I've got this opened as an object, and then we can go in and do all the other things that you guys did. So we'll just do one other quick trick on this. I'm going to come up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects. We are going to do a new Smart Object via copy. Again, we have to do it this way in order to get a completely second set of data that we can process any way that we want to process it. I'm going to double click on this, and I'm really going to blow this out. I'm going to go the other direction from what most of you guys did, but I'm going to hit it pretty hard. So I'm going to grab my exposure, and I'm going to take it up. I don't want to completely nuke things out, but I'm going to go up to, say, roughly 1.5 stops. Yeah, I'm going to do 1.5 stops and say OK to that. And it gives me the real blown out version of this. I'm going to temporarily turn that off because I think I can get a better selection of the figure using the less blown out version. I'm going to come up to the select menu. Actually, you don't even need to do the select menu. Hit any select tool. So I'm going to click on the lasso tool. That's not going to give it to me. I'm going to click on my drop down menu. And, oh, that's interesting. Well, yeah, once I select any of those tools, if you take a look up in your options palette, you should see a select subject. And it's actually got a drop-down menu right next to it. And we're going to do it in, you can do the select subject. You can do it either locally on your computer, or you can actually send a copy of your image up to Adobe's servers, and they will run a heavier, dutier version of it. So that's what this whole device or cloud is about. I'm going to stick with doing it local. I'm not too concerned about the real quality of this selection because I'm doing tonal work here. I'm not removing it, putting her on a different background, that kind of stuff. But at any rate, so this is where I'm at right now. I'm going to turn on my top layer. I'm going to select my top layer, and I'm going to click on Add Layer Mask. And this has now done the exact opposite of what I want it to do. It's actually showing now the darker version of the background and the lighter version of the girl. So simply hit Command-I to invert the mask. And this is how I would begin to actually process this guy out. I would probably go in and reprocess it to pull some of her hair back, but this is basically where we're going with this. Last thing, you need to zoom in here. Even though this thing has been color corrected, we need to make sure that the numbers here are the ones that we need a clue as to, are the skin tones in here as close to what we think they should be as they should be. So you're not going to see this on the recording. You will hear it, but I'm going to go on the whiteboard back here. you definitely need to write this down. So find a piece of paper, find something. So for normal skin tones, and this works for, I'm going to give you the range in here. It works for pretty much all skin tones. It's easiest to see it on Caucasian skin tone, only because there's a couple of caveats when you get to African American, Asian, that kind of stuff. There's things that'll change. So I'm going to start with Caucasian skin tone just to give us a starting point, and then I will sort of show you or talk about how that impacts or the relationship that we have for other skin tones. So the problem we have with this, though, is that the numbers in all of this are in CMYK. This is all comes out of old school printing industry stuff. There is no real RGB equivalent to this, and the reason there's no RGB equivalent to this is that K becomes an issue in how we deal with skin tone, and there is no equivalent to K in RGB. So I'm going to put up CMYK, and we're going to talk about Caucasian skin first, specifically hers. So in that setting, K equals 0. You do not have any K in Caucasian skin. This is what differentiates Asian, African American skin, whatever. You start to actually introduce levels of K to make skin lighter or darker. The relationship of CMY is pretty much the same in all skin tones. So what will happen is in Caucasian skin, we're going to do a ratio of CMYK. It's a balance of those to actually have good skin tone. In African American skin, you would still want that same CMYK ratio balance, but then depending on how light or dark that skin actually is, you're starting to raise or lower the values of K in that. So the relationship, how to figure these things out, is that we start with, again, I'm going to do these relative to one another. M is the sort of the baseline. So M always equals M. M you want relatively unchanged. Again, I'm close here, so this is fine tuning. If I had some really wild, insane colors or whatever, this might not work quite so well. But this, we're already somewhat close. These numbers are for fine tuning. So C equals 1/5 to 1/3 M, and Y equals M all the way up to M plus 50% M. That's my ratio for all of this. So again, these same things will hold true for pretty much skin tones across the board. This whole amount of additional yellow in here is what would account for sort of a stronger tint in Asian skin, but it also can be an artistic choice in that some people like their skin tones warmer, some people like their skin tones cooler, whatever. So anyway, that's what we're going to do with this. So where do we find this? So when you're looking at this person's skin tone, you don't want to be in the real super blown out areas in here, like her forehead, where I've looked at that. The other thing, specifically when you're shooting models like this, is that you need to be very careful about makeup. So I'm not going to pull a point of skin where I know that there's specific makeup on here. So I'm looking for sort of I'm going to actually probably pick a point right down here on her neck. It's probably there may be some foundation down there, that kind of stuff, whatever, but I don't have a really strong blush coloring down there. There's not going to be some weird sort of color that actually exists down there. So I am going to put a color sampler point down there. So grab the color sampler tool, and I'm going to click on that space. Again, I want to avoid the shadows. I don't want to be in there. I want to avoid the super highlights. So I'm simply going to click that one mark on her neck right there. And you'll see that when I do that, I end up with my number 1 point here, and it says 100% K. And the reason I'm doing that is because I've actually got my layer mask selected, not the girl. So I'm going to select the girl, and now you'll actually see I've got a readout here of a 221, 186, and a 160, but it's an RGB value. That doesn't help me at all. So I'm going to click on the little eyedropper and come down and say, I want you to show me these in CMYK color values. And now I get a CMYK readout. So if I look at the thing that I put up on the board, you'll see that my K is equal to 0. That's the first good thing. If I had K in here, I would actually have to boost the exposure more to remove the K out of this. It would make her skin look actually dirty, not what I want. I am going to stick with the M, so M is equal to M, so this 28 is fine, exactly where it should be. 1/5 of M, so basically we're dividing 28 by 5, which is basically the number, the low end of that would be 28 divided by 5 equals, it's like 5 1/3, something like that. That's fine. All the way up to, if I divide 28 by 3, it's roughly around 7. It's a little bit above 7. And you can see my C value is at 7. So it is exactly in the range that I actually want it to be. And then if we look at the Y value that's in here, it's reading 35. So in 35, what I said it could be is, my range is Y is equal to M, which would be 28. So my range for Y is 28 all the way up to M plus half of M. Half of M is 14. 14 plus 28 is 42? Is 42. That's my range. You can see that my Y value is 35. It's right in the middle range here. So this tells me that the color is correct on this. Are there questions about this part? You can't believe how this will help you out if all of a sudden you're struggling with color and you're just like, oh God, I don't know what it should be. I don't know what it should be, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, are there questions about any of this process? All right, you can close that up. You do not need to save that. Does everybody have their copy of the Castle file? Does anybody not? I want to deal with Refine Edge. So if you don't, Anthony was really kind, even though I didn't ask him, to say that we could work on a copy of his file if we had to. So if you go to the server and look, there's Anthony's Castle file right down here. So if you don't have a copy, just grab this, drag it to your own desktop. Don't run this stuff off the server. But you can use your copy of this as well, whatever. So I'm just going to actually run this. I'm going to use his to do this because I don't have one. So has everybody got this guy open? All right, I'm going to turn on all of these different variations of it. So I want everybody to zoom in to where the grass meets the sky on the far left-hand side of this image. So if we come in here and take a look, you can see that there is a problem with the selection with the mask right here. You can see that whole much little whiter edge on there. I mean, the quick selection tool did a fairly good job of it, but the quick selection tool is not perfect. And so this is a result that we actually end up with in here. Before we go any further with this, though, I want everybody to scooch over so that you can see the side edge of the castle. Can everybody come over here and just see the side edge area right here? If you look close enough in here, do you see a bright green line on the left edge of the castle? Anybody have any idea what that is? That is chromatic aberration. Now, we had set up our camera raw to eliminate that part, but this is a DNG file, so the person who made this file and who created it originally didn't use this, so we need to fix that part of it. To see where it is, we're going to actually start with the very bottom, because we got to do it now. We've got 3 layers. We got to do it on all 3. So double click on the bottom layer to open it up into Camera Raw. Zoom into this very same spot. And you'll still see not only the green line there, But if you look really closely, if you look at my screen right here, where you can see lines that are going on the other side, so it's this little area right here, there's a magenta stain right there. That is true chromatic aberration. It's yellow, it's orange, green going on one side, magenta going on the other side. Sometimes you'll find chromatic aberration that goes blue-yellow. Does this sound familiar to anybody? These are the LAB coordinates, right? Remember, LAB, we have lightness, then we have the B channel, which is blue to yellow, and the A channel, which is green to magenta. This is what we're looking at right here. You don't, rarely will you have both of them, but it'll be off on one axis or the other. So anyway, in this case, clearly magenta green. To fix this, scroll down to the bottom of your panels that are on the the right-hand side are control panels, and it's going to be under optics, I believe. It is under optics, and you'll see at the very top, remove chromatic aberration. And when you click on that, you will see that the green line is now gone and the magenta line is also gone. And that's all we need to do. You can go ahead and say OK to that. Double click on the next one, the one that's the castle. So I've just gone up a layer, and we do the exact same thing. We need to remove the chromatic aberration from that. And then finally, double click on the very top one, and again, click on the same thing, remove chromatic aberration from that, and say OK. Now if we take a look at the edge of that castle, you'll see that the green is gone and the magenta on the other side is gone as well. So now we can go back and talk about the problem that we've got with this actual mask in the field that's actually sitting above this part. So there's options that we have. If we take a look where the problem is that it's going to be this layer that is the sky that's sitting up here at the top. That's the layer mask where the problem is. If you want to see the layer mask by itself, hold down the Option key and just click on the layer mask. And you can see this is where it is. It's this edge actually needs to be refined. That's where our problem is in this. So I'm going to turn this back on. To do this, we're going to do this two different ways, and I'll tell you the way I think works actually better. So to do this, you can click on the mask of that very top layer, the one that's actually hiding the grass and the castle but showing the sky, and then up to the Select menu, down to Select and Mask. It'll actually open this up into the Select and Mask workspace. Then simply click on your drop-down menu and go from onion skin down to on layers. And this will show you what the resulting image, any change that we make in this space should be reflected in this. And it looks just like, we see that same problem. The transition along the very top, all those pieces of grass along the top are heather. Now, we've already used the quick selection tool. We can't use the quick selection tool again. What we can do though is we can use the second of the tools down, which is the Refine Edge tool. If you click on that tool and come over onto your screen, it is a brush. You do not want to run this on anything more than the problem area. So don't come in here and whack this with some big ass old brush. You don't want to do that. I've got a smaller brush that'll allow me to paint along that entire edge. And you simply click and start to drag along that entire edge of where all that white is. I'm not going to go all the way down. I'm just going to go and let go. And you can see it does a much better job of it. It gets rid of that white part in there. It looks a little bit heavy-handed to me because it's actually wiping out a lot of the grass. That's the way it's actually achieving the improvement of this. It's killing the grass in here. And I don't think that that's necessarily the best way that we can do this. So I'm not going to do it here, but I just want you to know that this is one of your options that you could do this here. I'm going to cancel out of this. And instead, we're going to go old school. We're going to go back to a thing that existed in Photoshop before the Select and Mask workspace. Anybody in this room, how many people in this room have used the Refine Edge tool of days of yore? Okay, well, we're going to look at it right now because it's a great tool, and it's the one I actually think, even though it's older than the Select and Mask, in some ways I think it's a superior tool to do this with. So it's hidden. So again, something to either write down or watch the video or commit to your memory or however you're going to do this part. But to get to it, you hold down your Shift key and then come up to the Select menu down to Select and Mask. And when you let go, what is going to happen is that it'll actually pull up a very different, we're not in the Select and Mask workspace. This is the old refined mask tool. This was actually software that was written by a bunch of high school kids, and Adobe saw it and went and bought this from them and then rolled it into Photoshop, and now they've tweaked it, obviously. But for me, this in many ways is a superior tool to what we just had, so I want to give you a quick tour of this. This is the one that I use more than, well, I can't say more than Select and Mask. They both have their places. But once I have a selection, if I need to work on it, this is usually the tool that I actually go to. So, everybody got this thing up? Anybody not? All right. The first thing we have to do is set the view. So if you click on the View drop-down menu, you'll see that there is no onion skin in this guy. There's simply marching ants, overlay, blah, blah, blah. You need to come down to On Layers. This is the same as in the Select and Mask tool. So click On Layers, and you'll notice now that what's happened is that this, again, gives you the preview of what this thing is really going to look like. You'll see your changes happen in real time. If you click on Show Radius, your image will go black. So I'm looking at the little check boxes that are right next to the view part right here. What radius is that Photoshop, when you do this, again, you need to start with your mask selected when you're doing this, because we're refining the edges of the mask. If you were on the image, it would not be doing this. But on this edge, on the mask itself, Photoshop knows where the mask begins and ends. It knows what's black and it knows what's white. We haven't established any radius yet. So if you grab the radius slider that's under edge detection and start to drag it to the right and let go, you will notice that it actually starts to open up the area exactly where the black and white part of the mask are actually touching one another. And if you continue to drag that radius on up, you'll notice that the area gets bigger. And if you continue to drag it up, it gets bigger still. The trick to using this tool is that this is the way the tool works, and this is really an important part about it. So you need to get this into your mind about how this whole thing is actually going to work. The way this thing works is that there's an algorithm that's run on what you tell Photoshop to run it on, and that area is established by the radius. So what we're telling Photoshop is, I want you to run this tool on this area. The tool is either on or off. There's no strength slider. There's no doing it twice. None of those things work. It's either you're 100% in or you're 100% out. That's it. And it's one shot. Again, there's no run it a second time will do nothing. Again, there's no, I only want 50% of that. That doesn't exist. It's either I want you to run the algorithm on this spot or I don't. And radius is what controls where you run it and where you don't. Does that make sense, everyone? So I don't need this radius run. I don't need this algorithm to run up here on the sky. I don't need to run it down here on the grass down here. I need it to run just on that janky edge that I've got going in here. That's where I need the thing to run. So I'm going to actually drop this down, and you do not need to have the show radius on. It just shows you guys what's really going on here. You can turn that off, and you will see the difference. You will see that, okay, yes, it did get rid of this part. If you want, again, this part of the image right here does not have a preview per se, but what it does have is the thing that's right underneath Show Radius, Show Original. And if you click on Show Original, it'll show you our before. And if you click on it again, it'll show you the after. So that's basically what's going on. That's your preview part in here. However, so I've got a radius set at like 6. You can set yours, but just set it there just so you can sort of see what's going on. If you hold down your space bar, you get the hand, and you can actually grab the hand and you can start dragging over. And I want you to take a look at the top of the castle. And if you want to see the radius, again, click Show Radius, and you'll see it's gone all the way around the castle. So again, it's looking at that mask and saying, okay, we want to go on this side of the mask and that side of the mask. So I am going to turn Show Radius off, turn Original on and off. And if we turn this on and off, you'll actually notice that this is, if you look at the little bricks that are on the very top, right in this area right in here, it's actually smacking those really hard. It's actually rounding them off. So I'm going to uncheck show radius, turn it back on. It's too aggressive on the castle. If we take a look at the very top of the castle, and again, we're going to show original, and then turn it off, and then show original. Does a little bit better job on the top part up there. But if I look at the bricks that are on the far right-hand side, again, show original, turn it off, turn it back on, turn it off. Again, it's sort of like knocking, it's rounding those corners up. It's actually softening them up. I don't want that part to happen. I'm going to go back to the bricks that are on the left side of the castle, the sort of shorter ones right here. I'm going to turn the show original off. I'm going to drop my radius all the way back down to 0. And again, I get that little white line up there, but now I'm going to start to drag this up slowly. So I'm going to come up to like a 1 or a 2. And then again, show original and turn it off. And when I'm right at about a 2 on there, it gets rid of everything that I want to get rid of on the castle without, again, hitting this any harder. It's getting rid of that little white line that's on the top, but it's not eating into the bricks. It's not doing any of this. So a radius of 2 is working great for me for the castle. If I did the 6 that I needed to do to get the stuff out of the grass, it's too aggressive on the castle. So I'm going to leave my radius slider at 2. I'm going to hold down my space bar to get the hand. To go back out, you can actually zoom out as well. And I can see that I've still got the problem on the heather part right here. And if I turn on my show radius, you can see why. It doesn't cover all of the grass. It's too small. But this is correct for the castle. So you can actually have both. To do both, I'm going to undo the show radius. You click on this brush icon that's in the Refine Mask tool. If you click on the lower right-hand corner, you'll see there's a drop down. You have the Refine Radius tool or the Erase Refinements tool. I'm going to select the top one, the Refined Radius tool. You get a little brush. Again, I'm going to make mine a little bit smaller, and I'm going to paint that brush along the edge of where the grass is actually meeting the sky. Now you'll notice that it gets really super dark right now. Don't worry about that. That's just showing you where the brush really is. When you let go, it actually runs the algorithm. And you can see it keeps the shadowing of more of the grass up in the sky than the Select and Mask version actually did. That's why I think this tool is actually a little better. I'm going to hold down the space bar and continue this and continue to drag it around the rest of the edge along the top until I can get all the way down and just touch the castle and stop right there. Yes?
Can you run me through what does the Refine Radius tool like do? Like I get it, but what is it doing to the actual image? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So I'm going to zip all the way back out and you'll see exactly what this is doing. So if you take a look at my screen, you'll see I've zipped back out here. I'm actually going to just show the radius. What I've now said that I want to do is I want a very small radius around the castle to run this algorithm on. I want a much larger radius, a much larger area, because the area that I need to refine that edge is much larger. So what the algorithm is doing is it's actually going in and looking at the image. It's looking at tone, it's looking at color to try to develop a better mask. And all the selection tools in Photoshop are doing the exact same thing. But again, this is either on or off. I'm saying, okay, in any area that's under this that I see the radius through on this, that algorithm is being run on those pixels of the image. Everything that's in black is being left alone. That algorithm isn't being run on that at all, which is great because it'll fuck your image up. Okay, I'm going to turn off show radius. We're almost done here, guys. I am going to go all the way over there to the trees that are on the right side of the castle, and you'll see I've got more highlights on those trees than I want. So again, even though I've got my little 2 radius on there is getting part of it, some of the trees are actually falling outside of it. So I can go to an even smaller brush and I can just basically go over the areas in here that need it. There's an area here in the middle that doesn't need it. This shrub doesn't need it, but then the little white stuff starts happening again. Again, you don't want to just come over here and just do a big sweep across this thing and say, yep, I'm going to run that tool everywhere. You only want to run it where it needs to be run and nowhere else. And I'm going to finish out till I get down just to about where the sand dunes are. Look up at my screen really quickly. You can see there's places that I've actually skipped over because it didn't need it. That little 2 radius actually hit it just fine. However, when I get finally to the beach, I'm going to show my original again. And the original has actually got some of that white stuff that's up at the top, but it's meant to be there. I think those are actually sand dunes that are actually happening up at the top. I want those in here. I don't want those taken out. Unfortunately, and it makes just this solid white line in there, unfortunately, the radius that's over here, that little 2 radius that we set to begin with, is actually causing me, is messing this up. I don't want that. I don't want to run the edge detection on this part of the image. So you can actually go to the next brush down, click on that little brush on the side, come down to Erase Refinements. You also get a brush. You can make this brush pretty good size because we're simply getting rid of stuff. And I'm going to start painting right along the top edge of the sand dunes. You'll see you'll get another indication of what's going on. If you want to see what's really happening though, turn on your Show Radius. You can actually, you don't even need to see this. It's erasing the radius on this. So I'm simply going to continue to get rid of all of that. I don't even have to look at it. I know that it all needs to be gone. So now if I zip back out, you can see this is what my image looks like right here. So look up at my screen really quickly. What I've said is, I need a big area of radius on the left-hand side to get the grass. I need a small pencil line going around the castle to get it. I need kind of a mix of a little bit bigger radius and that small pencil line along the treetops on the right side of the castle, and I need nothing on the beach. And that's how you use the Refine Edge tool. All of these adjustments, smooth, feather, contrast, shift edges, we do not use any of this stuff. There are better ways of doing this later that we're going to learn later. If I had a real problem, I might consider doing a decontaminate colors, but as you guys saw that in the Select and Mask Workspace thing that we did last week, that can really fuck you up. It's a destructive move, and we'd have to do it on everything here. But nonetheless, so I'm going to leave this output to the layer mask. I'm simply going to say OK to this. And this is now a much refined edge part here. If you take a look, your image looks, and we've done our first composite. Are there questions about this? Oh, I know people who would go in here with a brush and a pen tool and try to hand paint all of that like forever. And it's like, no. Okay, I'm going to say this is a good time for a break. It's 2:25. Let's make it a hard 10 minutes, be back at 2:35. If you guys remember how we were scrambling last week between the breaks and people showing up late and all that kind of stuff, we lost 40 minutes. So I'm going to keep this pretty terse and quick, and I'll see you guys in 10 minutes.